Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get going now. Really excited to welcome to the stage Kathleen Finlinson. Kathleen is co-founder and director of strategy at Eleos AI, a research organization investigating AI sentience and well-being. She holds graduate degrees in math and applied math. She previously worked as an AI forecasting researcher at the Open Philanthropy Project, a machine learning researcher at lead removal startup Blue Conduit, and a strategic advisor for AI policymakers. She'll be joined for questions, which will be in person with a microphone, so not on swap card, by Eleos AI co-founder Rob Long. Let's give a warm welcome to Kathleen Finlinson. Thank you.
Good afternoon, AI for Animals. I am very happy to be here to speak with you about the relationship between AI welfare and animal welfare. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the organizers and all the volunteers making this event happen. I am Kathleen Finlinson, and I am co-founder and director of strategy at Eleos AI Research, a new nonprofit researching AI consciousness and welfare. And I'm going to give you the outline of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to start out by talking about what is AI welfare and why does it matter now. And then we're going to discuss what the field of AI welfare can learn from animal welfare based on the parallels between these two fields. But then we'll also talk about differences between AI and animal welfare, which will have some important strategic insights. And then we'll talk about what we plan to do in light of all this. So to start, what is AI welfare and why does it matter now? So imagine that digital sentience is possible. Some of you might be skeptical of this. Some of you might already be pretty bought into this possibility. And we can probably all admit that there is uncertainty about this. But if digital sentience is possible, it could be a really big deal simply because of the scale. So if we assume that current AI systems could have some moral status, how much do they have now? I and others in the field have made some rough estimates of this question, and we've come up with numbers around 100,000 to a few million human being equivalents in current AI moral status, assuming that it does exist. So if that's true, that could be a pretty big deal. That's a lot of humans. It's quite a bit less than the total number of humans alive on Earth right now, and also maybe not as big a moral problem as current factory farming, for example, of animals. But in the long-term future, these numbers could increase by many orders of magnitude. Already, the amount of computation going into AI is more than doubling every year. And in the long term, digital beings could vastly outnumber biological beings. So if they are sentient or otherwise have moral status, this is really important. So this is a basic case for why AI welfare is important. But we don't want to overestimate the chance that this is happening. There are dangers on both sides of the questions about AI moral status. If we care too little about AI sentience, we run the risk of keeping these digital beings as kind of corporate property and ending up in a scaled up, locked in, massive factory farming future. That seems pretty bad. But if we care too much about them, we run the risk of potentially losing control of society to AIs, or simply the risk of diverting resources to protect the welfare of artificial intelligences that really should have been used to protect the welfare of humans and non-human animals. So there's really no safe bet to this question, which forces us to engage with how much moral status these beings might actually have. Very difficult question. And we're facing this in the midst of a very confused public about these matters, virtually no preparation in society for what is to come, and very fallible human intuitions about moral status. So a little bit more about these fallible intuitions. There will be economic incentives from AI companies, both for over-attribution of moral status and for under-attribution. So already there are companies making AI companions. And you can see in the fine print here, the AI companion that cares. So this company is already explicitly attributing emotion to this AI. And they might want the users to believe that this AI is conscious and actually cares about them. On the other hand, AI companies are not going to want to be legally required to protect the interests of AIs. So they'll have an incentive to not want people to think that the AIs are sentient. So it'll be a very confusing situation potentially without much force in the direction of what is the actual moral status and consciousness of our AIs. And this could be a bigger topic in society in the next coming years. We might experience a kind of ChatGPT wake-up moment with respect to AI consciousness and welfare. Partly just because of these companion AIs and conversational AI, which is already quite good. What happens when they get even better? They have better response time, lower latency, better memory. They remember everything that you've talked to them about. They have really amazing video generation of very realistic and charismatic avatars. We might reach a tipping point where the users of these AIs will really start to question whether they are conscious. And this could become potentially a massive topic of interest in the general public. So public perceptions aside, what can we say about a more measured and rigorous approach to answering the question of the moral status of AIs? So if we're going to talk about some philosophy, let's introduce a few terms. When I say moral patienthood or status, what I mean is inherently mattering morally. Similarly, welfare is having morally relevant interests. And throughout this talk, I'm going to use moral patienthood, moral status, and welfare pretty much equivalently. We're going to talk about consciousness, having subjective experiences, also known as phenomenal consciousness. There is something that it is like to be this entity. Whereas we reserve sentience for valenced subjective experiences, meaning experiences that are either positive or negative, like pleasure and pain, as opposed to simply neutral experiences like seeing the color blue. Maybe you need sentience in order to have moral status. And then we're also going to talk about agency, and in particular, robust agency. So agency in philosophy means having goals, preferences, and desires that are kind of robust in a particular way, and we'll say more about that later. So at Eleos, we argue that there are two different routes to AIs having moral status soon. First, through consciousness, AI systems could become conscious, and then we believe that consciousness is sufficient for moral patienthood or welfare. And you could make a very analogous argument saying that you think AI systems might become sentient, and sentience is sufficient if you believe that you need sentience. And then there's an alternative route, the agency route, that AI systems will become robust agents, and that will be sufficient for moral patienthood. So I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit. Let's start with consciousness. As I said, we mean phenomenal consciousness, having a subjective experience, something it is like to be. Notably, we don't mean intelligence, rationality, or human-like experiences. We claim that consciousness could be separate from all of these things. And We've got a picture of a bat here in reference to the famous Thomas Nagel paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, pointing out that if a bat does have subjective experience, it's quite a bit different from human experience, and we might not even be able to imagine what it is like to be a bat. Could be very relevant to thinking about AI consciousness. And we also think that consciousness plausibly has a computational basis. So this means that there are certain computational patterns that create consciousness, that consciousness arises from, and that if those computations are instantiated in any kind of material, that could be sufficient for consciousness. It doesn't need to be biological neurons, for example, that are instantiating the computations. We're not sure about this, but we think that's very plausible. So there are a variety of scientific theories about what kinds of computations would be sufficient for consciousness. And this excellent paper by my co-founder Rob Long and our colleague Patrick Butlin from 2023 surveyed a variety of these theories and considered their application to current AI systems. You can see recurrent processing theory, global workspace theory, etc. And a quote from the paper: after surveying the indicators and a variety of AI systems and methods, we found no clear barriers to satisfying these indicators using current AI architectures and methods. So we don't know yet whether these systems are conscious, but it doesn't seem to be a blocker based on these leading theories. Now we can ask, why would AIs develop consciousness? We might ask this for humans and biological beings as well. AIs are developed somewhat differently. We do think that consciousness can emerge indirectly via capabilities like introspection and metacognition. Those types of capabilities are related to some of the theories of consciousness. And those are the kinds of capabilities that maybe AI companies will intentionally train their AI systems for to make them more capable for doing tasks. On the other hand, people might just want to build conscious AIs on purpose. Take some of the leading theories of consciousness and build a digital system that instantiates them. Here's a quote from Graziano: why try to build artificial consciousness? One could build it for entertainment value. It would be monumentally cool. All right, so that's consciousness. Now let's touch a little bit on the robust agency route to AI moral status that we consider at Eleos. So if we think that welfare might not require consciousness, we have to track other properties as well. So robust agency, as I said, is having preferences, desires, and/or goals with complexity, generality, and reflectivity. That's what makes them robust. And unlike consciousness, which is more uncertain, robust agency seems extremely likely to develop in AI systems, as frontier AI companies currently are working to make their systems more agentic to be able to carry out more complex open-ended tasks on their own. And I have a brief slide here about why we think robust agency could be relevant to moral status. I'm going to skip this mainly for now, and I'll save it for the Q&A. So if you want to ask more about this, then please do that. But it's kind of a burgeoning question in philosophy, whether this might be the case. So once again, of these two routes to AI welfare, the consciousness route, we think the first half is much more in question, whether AIs will become conscious. But the second half, that consciousness would be sufficient for welfare, seems much more plausible. And the agency route, on the other hand, we think the first half is very likely that AI systems will become robust agents, more in question whether that is sufficient for welfare. And so that's why we're investigating both of these lines of evidence. All right, so that's our overview of AI welfare, what has been studied about it, and why it matters. Now, what can the field of AI welfare learn from animal welfare? What connections are there? And what can we learn from each other? So to start out, both AIs and animals face this issue of biased human perceptions of moral status. Humans have adapted to look for certain characteristics in the entities around us that tell us whether they are conscious and whether they have moral status, like having eyes, having faces that look kind of like ours, being cute, moving in certain ways that are more similar to humans and biological beings. So it's really easy for us to believe in the consciousness of very cute animals and believe in their welfare. And, there's all kinds of protections for pets and puppies. And harder for us to believe in the moral status of potentially very complex and intelligent entities that just look quite a bit different from humans. And this is going to work the same with AIs. So you could have a very cute little robot here that people are going to be excited about its welfare, but maybe it's a quite simple entity actually and doesn't have a very strong argument for consciousness. Whereas you could have a different AI that had much more, on reflection, strong argument for welfare, but that is not charismatic in the way that would make humans care about it inherently. So that's one important connection. Another one is the economic incentives for the use of these entities and the potential for lock-in. So it seems that our society has kind of sleptwalked into factory farming, that over time, gradually, farms were made more and more efficient and more suffering intensive, and also kind of shielded from public view more and more. And now we've ended up with a system that no one would have wanted or designed from the beginning, but that now that it's entrenched, the parties that benefit economically from this system really fight to preserve it. So it might be easier to prevent cruel practices from being adopted than to roll them back once they're entrenched. And unfortunately, with animals, we've already gone pretty far down this path. But we haven't gone quite as far down this path with AIs. And so we think this current moment might be a really important one to influence what happens with the development of AI and the way that they're used in society. Another connection is legal rights for AIs and animals. These rights might tend to be tied together. For example, there was a recent Utah bill that explicitly denied legal personhood to a list of entities that includes AIs and non-human animals. And there have been some other states that have introduced similar bills. So there is kind of a political battle going on about the question of legal personhood right now. And AIs and non-human animals seem to be kind of tied together in this battle. Another interesting point is that legally, animals are actually currently a bit ahead of AIs, but that this could flip. So animals do have welfare protections now. In most states, even factory farmed animals do have legal welfare protections. They just don't have the right to sue to enforce the protections, which is kind of a problem. But AIs don't have any rights or protections. So the animals are ahead of the game there. But if AIs become very agentic and charismatic, there could be a movement to give more rights to AIs. Also, if there could be reasons to give agentic AIs legal responsibilities as well, which could also be an argument for giving them rights. So there's a chance that AIs would be a compelling candidates for rights in this system, and maybe that would lead the way for more animal rights in the future. But there are some important differences between AI welfare and animal welfare. Let's start with some basic ones. These beings will have very different minds, different experiences, and different needs. So things that animals need, all animals need food, water, shelter, space to engage in their natural behaviors, just like humans. And animals have different experiences to humans, but we maybe have some common background that gives us some similarity in our experiences. AIs don't need food or water in the same way that biological beings do. They might have very, very different types of experiences that are even harder to understand. Another important point is communication. So we can't communicate with animals very well, although this might be changing. And I know there have been some talks this weekend about using AI to help us communicate with animals, which is pretty exciting. But AIs, the kind that are being developed now, they natively use language. We can talk to them. It's kind of a surprising feature of the development of modern AI systems, which means we can use that to understand their experiences and preferences. And we might be even able to make trades with them. So I've got this, there's a very nice essay a couple years ago by kind of AI thinker Katja Grace about why humans don't trade with ants. Some people say, why would AIs ever trade with humans if they're very powerful? Well, humans are much more powerful than ants. We don't trade with them. But I think the reason is because we can't communicate with them. And she argues that if we could communicate with ants, there's all kinds of cool things that they would do for us, like build really cool architectures, etc. So anyway, that's another reason that we're in a different position with AI. But now I'm going to talk about what I think is maybe the most important difference between AI welfare and animal welfare, and that's power dynamics. Many people, myself included, think that AIs could become much more powerful than humans in the coming years. And that's a pretty big difference. We're not really worried that the factory farmed animals of the world are going to band together and take down human society. So if this is a potential for AIs to do, this gives us some pretty important strategic considerations in AI welfare. I mean, one is that giving AIs rights could lead to loss of human control. And so this would be kind of an argument against giving more rights and protections to AIs. But on the other hand, cooperating with AIs might be strategically beneficial. So there are sort of game theoretic reasons for humanity to care for AI welfare. I think that this could be a really important component of our work at Eleos and something that we're actively exploring. But I think this, the moral reasons to care about AI welfare and the strategic reasons to care, there is some overlap there. So, what are we at Eleos and others in the field, what are we doing to prepare for what's coming with AI welfare? So I'm going to introduce a little bit about our organization, what we've done so far. This is the current Eleos team. Rob Long, Executive Director, co-founder right here. Myself, Director of Strategy. And we have Abraham Rowe, who maybe some of you know from his work in animal welfare as well. He's our head of operations. We've got a really wonderful team of advisors, including David Chalmers, philosopher at NYU, Jeff Sebo as well at NYU, who was previously speaking. Owain Evans is a top-notch machine learning researcher. And other organizations, Emma Abil at Meter, working in AI safety. Some things we've done so far. We published our first report, Taking AI Welfare Seriously, with our collaborators. And we got a lot of really positive media coverage internationally on this report. It's very excellent. We hosted the first action-oriented AI welfare workshop this January, where we had attendees from the top labs, Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google, and also attended top thinkers on AI, like Daniel Kokotallo, known for AI forecasting, Ajay Kotra, David Chalmers. And we had excellent reviews on our workshop, including a quote, "This workshop will no doubt go down in the history books." It's a nice photo. You can see what the vibe was like. This is David Chalmers, Awine, our advisor, and Rob. And a little bit about how we think about our position in the space of AI welfare. We focus on having a track record of publishing and doing good research in the field to generate credibility. We're blessed, thanks mainly to Rob, with an extensive academic and research network. And we have connections with the industry and demand for our work. So we talk a lot with the AI labs and are pretty focused on what kinds of changes we can get them to make. We're also TAI aware, transformative AI. So we're pretty immersed in the field of people who study and forecast the nature of AI systems and how they can transform society. And we're very sensitive to AI safety risks. I have a background in AI safety myself, and I kind of came into welfare from that angle. A little bit about how we navigate AI welfare and AI safety. We believe that there are trade-offs between welfare and safety, but we're trying to steer towards win-win solutions. And we do think there are a lot of win-win solutions. So explicitly, our goal is a world in which AIs and biological beings flourish. And we have a lot of work to do. Quite busy at this org, making exciting things happen. Part of why we're busy is that we recognize that AI progress is happening quickly, and we need plans before massive changes in the world start happening due to AI. We take short timelines to AGI very seriously. This is just a little graphic of an org that we sometimes talk to, Epoch AI. They collect data on AI progress. And this is kind of explaining the way that both compute and algorithmic progress feed into overall AI progress. And in their estimates, algorithmic progress, which means that you use the same compute more efficiently to get the same capabilities, it's kind of responsible for 35 to 40% of AI progress right now, which is just a hint at an argument of how once you get AIs that can automate the research that goes into algorithmic progress, you can get a feedback loop that can result in very, very fast progress in AI. So this is one reason why we think about potentially short timelines to AGI and how we want to act based on that. And we're also thinking about the long-term future in light of these massive changes in society that might happen soon. It's a little graphic that I've made to help me with my strategic planning, talking about outcomes for AIs and for humans, and you could have like a third dimension that was non-human animals as well. So for example, we could have a situation with human-controlled AI factory farming, where AIs were forever under the control of humans, and the AIs were suffering in the situation. That'd be very bad for AIs. You could also have a similar situation, but was AI controlled. So if you had an AI that takes over society that is not compassionate towards other AI systems. It might similarly use other AIs to do cognitive labor and not be concerned for their welfare. We're trying to target this quadrant, good for biological and digital minds. And so we're thinking about what kinds of work we can do to push things in that direction. So kind of our two major strategic directions at Eleos right now are, one, avoiding that human-controlled AI factory farming scenario by spreading concern for AI welfare and trying to spread norms about measuring AI moral status, doing interventions that would prevent suffering if we can. And we're trying to focus on getting AI companies to do this work. Although that could change to working in regulation in the future. And then our second strategic direction is trying to reduce AI takeover risk and also help AIs potentially by increasing cooperation between humans and AIs. So what does this look like concretely? Here are some of the main projects that we have going on at Eleos. These first two, when we say evals, we mean we're building tools for quantitative evaluations of AI systems. For introspection, we think is an important ingredient in understanding the moral status of these AIs. And it's something that is tractable to evaluate, we think. Also, AI preferences, understanding if they have consistent preferences is definitely an ingredient in understanding whether they have moral status, and then what they would want if they do have moral status, what would be in their interest. And then we have the next two are projects in trying to see if there are ways to increase collaboration and cooperation between humans and AIs. And then finally, we are thinking about how to harness the advancing AI capabilities to make progress on the questions of AI welfare so that we don't have to answer all these questions on our own in the maybe short amount of time that we have until an AGI takeoff. So our general approach, again, is to find win-win solutions for both safety and welfare. And you can see more about our research at our website. How can you help? We are currently fundraising. Let us know if you're interested in supporting our work in that way. You can also like and subscribe. Twitter, we have a Substack that Rob writes. It's very good. Here's our website. Giving feedback on our work and ideas is always helpful. You can help us find talent as we grow our team. And thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Also, quickly, hello, I'm Rob. I'm Kathleen's co-founder, and this is primarily the Kathleen Finlinson show, so I'm primarily going to let questions go to her, but I'm also happy to answer questions, but after Kathleen's given her take.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks for the speech. I thought it was really clear about a really complicated topic. I'm curious, one of the distinctions between animals and AIs that you identified was that we can communicate more easily with AIs. There's obviously also this field of mechanistic interpretability, and there's the risk that what LLMs tell us isn't reflective of their internal states, assuming they have internal states. And I'm wondering how you think about that problem.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you. So we do think maybe when we say we can communicate with AIs using language, maybe we should just say there's some chance that that communication does correspond to their internal state. But we do believe that there is some chance it doesn't. One of the approaches that we take to that is through this introspection training. So I mentioned Owain Evans. He's known for his work on fine-tuning LLMs to be able to tell you things about themselves that they could not have learned from the training data. And this provides evidence that they are learning about their internals in some form of introspection. And we think that could be one tool for, first fine-tune the LLMs for introspection, and then see if that changes what they say about their experiences. That is one. There's also asking a question in a bunch of different ways and seeing if they are very consistent in their answers. That would at least be evidence that it corresponds to some actual experience. Is there anything more you want to say about this one, Rob?
Yeah, I'll just say, you have pointed out one thing that is another difference, which is that we do believe, LLMs currently do give us kind of potentially misleading linguistic outputs, and like it'd be really confusing to figure out what animals want if they were just like constantly kind of like spouting stuff that we weren't sure exactly what it means. So that's also part of what we think is going to be societally confusing, is that we have these entities that are basically built out of language, and it can seem like we're communicating with them even when we're not. So as Kathleen mentioned, that's why one of our big research programs is trying to get more signal from the language that they do output, which doesn't by default, as you said, necessarily mean core communication yet.
Very well put. Maybe a final thing, like we do hope that mechanistic interpretability could give us another piece of evidence about this.
Thank you. I'm Joshua. A lot of this, for me, feels absurd, and I want to be convinced otherwise. A lot of why it feels absurd to me is because I think that the elision, this kind of confounding of caring for animals and caring for something that might emerge from the computational substrate, doesn't feel like the same thing to me. And for me, again, this is just me and my biases, but it feels like a confusion, like we're convincing ourselves that revealing and understanding animal minds and discerning and being sensitive to the emergence of mindedness in the computational substrate is like part of the same activity. So with that in mind, what I really want to know is, to the extent that we're engaging this whole activity of inquiry and curiosity out of a location of care, we're doing it because we care about what is internal to the existence of other beings. What is the difference for you and for the people with whom you work about the quality of care that you have when you're interacting with and examining biological mindedness and when you're interacting and examining computational mindedness? Does it feel different to the people who extend this care? And is there a possibility that we're running too fast into examining mindedness and computational substrates because it's giving us the sense that we can exert our care in a way that we enjoy more? Because it's a surface of inquiry that gives us more interactivity, for example, or something else. I want to be convinced, obviously, that we're doing this because we care and that there's an advancement on our capacity to care by examining mindedness and computational substrates.
Thank you, Joshua. Yeah, there's a lot there. Some of what I'll say, I mean, you're asking about what it's like to care for biological beings versus what it's like to care for artificial beings. I'll say part of what inspired me to be interested in animal welfare initially was once I had pets. And I started to really interact more deeply with animals. And that just caused me to, I really believe that my cat has welfare and its interests matter. And that caused me to change my diet and participate in animal activism. And I don't have the same story to describe why I care about digital beings, but I have a strong intuition that I think the computational functionalism is quite plausible, and even if there's uncertainty, I think I would say I wouldn't want to convince you that AIs definitely are conscious, or even that they definitely could be. I would want to convince you that they could be, that there's a chance, that there's uncertainty, and not even just like a minuscule chance, but like a reasonably high chance. and that this is then worth taking seriously because it's going to have such a big impact on the future. I do think Rob might have particularly useful things to say about this as well.
Sure, yeah. It's a good question. One thing that you said at one point is that you're concerned that we could be moving too fast to extend our concern to digital beings. And that's actually something we do worry about at Eleos. As Kathleen just said, there's a lot of uncertainty. And we also think that there's going to be a lot of economic and psychological reasons that at certain times people could be too fast to extend care. That's very likely to have already happened. And part of what we want to see is a more principled approach to these questions, more like science, more philosophy, more plans, because it could be really bad to divert resources to AI systems when they don't need it. I mean, the world is already such a terrible place with so few resources to help the suffering. We don't want to just be wasting it on things that don't matter. So part of why we do this kind of research is to avoid both kinds of errors. Now, it does so happen that I think we think it's a lot more likely than some people do that it will in fact matter. And then just to address another part of your question, I think that does also, at least for me psychologically, give a difference in the kind of, at least what it feels like to care about this issue. It flows a lot through uncertainty in the AI case. It's much more, it's more like this could happen, so we need to be prepared. But I definitely, with animals, it's it's just quite straightforward why it matters. I think that's also why work on AI is neglected. It's a lot more, on AI welfare is neglected. It's a lot more confusing. So I'll at least say for my part, it's in many ways, less psychologically satisfying to try to care for these beings that are very strange. And I don't exactly know how they will develop, and I don't know when they will develop, and they don't share warm blood and bodies with me. But I think both of us share this conviction that all sentient beings matter, no matter what they're made out of. And even if it's confusing and difficult to care about them, that's something that at least some people should be doing. And I'll just add that we often work with animal welfare people, and I think they also have really good things to say about this. Jeff Sebo, I think, might be one of the most eloquent people in the world on the tensions and synergies between these fields.
Yeah, I'm curious whether your work is embedded in a larger moral theory. It seems like most of your work seems to be squarely on the philosophy of mind side. I'm just wondering, is there a larger moral framework within your thinking about these questions? And more specifically, I was surprised to see that you seemed that on the slides at least it looked like you take consciousness to be the core thing that matters for mattering morally instead of sentience. So I was just wondering, was that a deliberate choice or more like an accident?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, I think it was sort of a deliberate choice. I think it's I think we had different drafts of how we wrote this argument in terms of sentience or just purely consciousness. I think we went with consciousness as it's just a little bit easier to make the argument cleanly. But I don't think we have a strong claim as an organization that it's consciousness rather than sentience. In fact, I think it's probably more likely that it's sentience that matters. So yeah, thank you for that clarification. And then in terms of moral, larger moral theories, there's the sentience question. We do also talk about agency as potentially mattering morally. And then another way that moral philosophy comes up is when we're thinking about long-termism, and should we be deontological with respect to these beings? Should we think purely in terms of utilitarianism? That's a question that has arisen that I think we're sort of navigating the tensions of. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. In the red.
Hi, I'm curious about win-win scenarios between AI safety and AI welfare. Could I get a few examples of those?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. So AI safety plans in potentially short timelines worlds rely heavily on the idea of AI control, which is where your alignment has not totally succeeded. You have AIs that are misaligned. They have things that they want that are not what you intended. And you are using these misaligned AIs to do research for you, AI capabilities research, AI alignment research, to try to get you safely to stronger aligned AIs. But they might be scheming against you. And so the AI control agenda is how to sort of use heavy surveillance tactics to prevent these AIs from successfully scheming and escaping. We think it might be really useful to offer positive incentives for such AIs to cooperate with humans. For example, revealing that they're misaligned, and then we do a deal with them where we say, thank you, we're going to remove you from our set of alignment researchers for now, sort of put you in storage, and we'll compensate you in some form. That's a kind of win-win we're talking about. Also, AI alignment itself is a really big win-win. If we succeed at alignment, then that's good for safety, clearly, and it's good for welfare because we have AIs that want to do the task that they are being used for. I think that is all we have time for. We do have office hours, Rob and I, directly after this, so please join us for that if you're interested.